Hey, Alex Bell here from the running room, and I'm joined by a good mate of mine and gun physiotherapist, Beau at the Clovelly Clinic. Beau, how are you, mate?
Good man, you. How's your morning going?
Mate, morning is off to a flyer. It's off to a flyer. Bowie, why don't we quickly start by just give us a quick little intro of who you are and where you work.
Mate, I have been a physio for the past few years. I've dove into a bunch of different areas in physio, kind of like floated around going into different kind of sporting teams, sporting environments, like athletic populations, as well as just seeing the general population. So I've kind of had a host of different experiences already, which has been really, really good. And then picked up a job working with you, Belly, at the Clovelly Clinic at the running room, basically just seeing heaps of runners, and it's been like absolute blast, kind of getting to know like that different population and applying some of the stuff that I've learned in other areas into that group, as well as like learning from the guns over at Valley, which has been absolutely amazing.
Nice, mate. And we're lucky enough to poach you across from the Panania Clinic at iMove and steal you a couple of days a week, which has been huge win for us. And what I love, mate, about you is probably just how across some of the literature you are across many topics, which I think is awesome. I froth physio, and I feel like you're a physio frother as well. And just kind of going back and forth about what's been published and staying up to date with that, I think, and then applying that clinically with our patients is huge. So, mate, I'm stoked to have you on board at Clovelly, mate. And I thought today what we might do is jump in and chat a little bit more about strength training in runners. We know it's something that can be hugely powerful. We know how good, how powerful it can be. But sometimes, we do know that runners neglect strength training. I think it's changing. What we've seen probably in the last 5 years, that narrative is changing, but I think we can still do a better job at educating. So, mate, what I thought I might start with is, why don't you just give us an overview of, why is strength training, why is it important?
So I think probably some of the main reasons that we want to see runners start to take up strength training and I think it's kind of important to understand what running actually is doing to the body, like what's going on when we are running, because I
Sure.
think runners will kind of group strength training as kind of different to their sport. They don't see that it's like really that useful for what they're doing. But if we kind of look into what's happening inside our bodies when we're running, kind of almost every step, even when we're running quite slowly, we're putting like really big forces through our muscles, our joints, and our ligaments and tendons. So with just like our calf muscles when we're running, they'll tend to do the most of the work, but they'll experience
Mm-hmm.
like 4 to like 9 times your body weight of force just on like a slow run.
Which is
So
incredible,
when we're
incredible
talking
amounts of
about like
force.
that's insane. Yeah. And like every step, just the force through your foot is like 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times your body weight, depending on how fast you're running. So like that's insane forces. Like if we want to prepare someone for that, or even just get them better and make them better at that, like we need to be exposing them to some like high force stuff. So going and doing like some body weight squats is like great and all, but like we actually really need to do like some really hard stuff to challenge the body and prepare it for something that's that difficult. That's so much more important when you've been injured. But I actually think it's incredibly important when you're trying to get better at running or prevent yourself from getting hurt, because that's a big demand to ask the body to do, and we need to prepare it for it. So in terms
Absolutely.
of like the benefits that we see, if we look at preventing injuries, the literature's been like a bit up and down, but if we look at on the whole for sport, strength training can reduce overuse injuries by about 50%. And then
Wow.
just in general population, strength is a big predictor for lots of types of injuries. In running itself, we see that in the best quality studies that we've had come out recently, it can reduce rates of injuries by as low as 30% and as high as 85%. Like
Tremendous.
that's massive. Yeah, like, and with the rates of being as high for injuries in runners, especially novice runners, like we can see why that's going to be like even more important in this population.
For
Like the
sure.
the
Yeah.
most people will be injured. If you're a runner, like good chance throughout your career you're going to have some kind of injury. You'll pick it up either
Yeah.
in the first kind of like 6 months, 3 months, or just at some point as you increase things. Humans are good at running. It's really easy to cook yourself because we're too efficient. And we love it too much. It's too easy to go and run. So we can cook ourselves pretty quickly. Setting yourself up for success by just preparing your body for that demanding task is like incredibly important.
Mm, absolutely, mate. I think all phenomenal points. I want to go back a step and touch on something that you mentioned, which I think is something that we probably see clinically a hell of a lot. And it probably goes back to some of the forces that are going through your body whilst you run, and some of the, the loads that are going through the muscles when you run, and what they need to be able to do.
Mm.
And then I think it goes back to like the common mistake we see is we think, particularly, we're talking about endurance running right now, okay? And so if we think about, runners, what they typically do, they think about running as an endurance sport. So then they think, okay, cool. Well, how do I need to train? I need to train in an endurance way. And so I'm going to do, 3 sets of 20 of bodyweight squats or calf raises or whatever it might be. But we just know that we're trying to, we're trying to mimic some of those loads that might be going through the body. We're also trying to have, an impact on generating strength, those kind of parameters. So sometimes what we see clinically is that the bodyweight exercises just isn't going to cut it. It's not going to be enough. So what we actually see is the evidence, would suggest that heavy, slow resistance training is far more effective in preventing injuries. But also, I think what you mentioned before is a really important point, is increasing performance. We know that people need to be using heavy loads and probably reducing that rep range down from 20, to more of those strength parameters.
Yeah, definitely. So if we think about kind of like an endurance sport, we can either run further so that like a shorter run is easier, and then you have like a bit more like general capacity or aerobic capacity to make it so that you can run faster. But also if we just get stronger, more powerful, or like better at using our musculature, we can make everything easier. I like to give the analogy of, mate, imagine if I put like a 20 kilo backpack on your back and made you walk up a hill 10 times. If I then take that backpack off and make you walk up the hill, you're going to be like, mate, that was so much easier without the backpack. Like, that was so easy. Like, it's essentially like if we prepare you for these big forces, then when we ask you to do something, it's a lot easier. And you'll fly up the hill. So in terms of strength training, when we do perform it like quite rigorously, and I actually think the research has done a really poor job of replicating the things that would actually be beneficial for runners.
Yeah.
And we still see really good improvements. Like we see anywhere from kind of 4 to 8% improvements in efficiency, just after like 8 to 9 weeks. That's like no time. If I really wanted to get someone to improve, I would be doing like, several 5-week blocks over the course of like months. And probably the quality of that like strength training and conditioning training that we do would be better than what we see in the research. So the improvements would probably be like a lot higher especially in novice runners, man. So
we see that people might use a super shoe, mate, and they might look for that benefit they can get out of a shoe. But we can say, hey, we can give you 4 to 8% just by implementing some good quality strength training. So I think it's and plus we're going to reduce your risk of injury. So I think it's a absolute. I mean, the literature there now it's a no-brainer. It has to be done, and I think it's just something that runners are starting to come on board with, which is awesome.
Yeah, mate, and I just wanted to touch on the plyometrics that you mentioned there. Like there's this thing called ground contact time. It's essentially how long you're on the ground for every kind of jump or every kind of step. And if you're running a marathon, you'll take around like 40,000 steps. So if we make you the slightest bit more powerful and you can get off the ground a little bit quicker and a little bit more efficiently, even if it's just like 10 milliseconds, like a less than 5% reduction in kind of ability to get off the ground, mate, that'll take 5 minutes off your marathon time. Like you're spending that much less time over that many steps. It adds up. Like it can be a really, really quick and easy, dirty way to make you like improve in your speed.
For sure. Another point I want to mention, Beau, which is something we hear commonly, and we hear it all the time, which is, I'm a runner. I don't want to get bulky. I don't want to put on size. I don't want to lift weights because I might get bigger. And we just know in the literature that it's just not true. I think there's a really nice systematic review that looks at many studies, and what they found is that body composition was unchanged, in these runners who implemented strength training. So we know that it is really hard to put on size. When you're lifting weights, it's tough. And particularly if you're doing, high amounts of running, it's just not going to make you bigger. It's not going to make you more bulky. What it is going to do is actually make you faster. It'll make you perform better, and it'll stop you getting injured. So it's something we hear commonly, and it's probably a myth that we want to try and demystify to get more runners, comfortable with picking up some weights and starting to load themselves up appropriately.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at like a bodybuilding or like more gym-paced population, or like one of those sports that you want to be big and bulky, those guys have to eat like heaps. They have to train and like very specifically around building muscle and size. Like
Hmm.
there will be some people that are prone to just gaining like weight and muscle a little bit more so, but on the whole, it's really hard to become like huge and jacked, and that actually um, can become something that impedes performance. But like it's almost impossible to do if you're running like very high mileage. It's just it takes up too much energy for you to then apply that to gain muscle. And I also think like most of the stuff that we're going to be doing is going to be like you mentioned before, Belly. Like we want to actually be doing like quite heavy, hard, like low rep kind of range. That's not the stuff that makes you gain heaps of muscle. That's the stuff that makes you just really strong. Primarily because those
Yep.
adaptations won't really come from like the muscle getting heaps bigger. It'll mostly become because your body gets better at producing like essentially a drive from your nervous system to produce like the
Sure.
biggest possible force. So you're basically
Yep.
just better at using the muscle that you have rather than gaining like tons and tons of mass.
Absolutely. Bowie, let's go now to, because I think we can talk literature and we can talk, why we should do this and convince people of that fact. But let's just go really practical now. Like, and let's keep it simple.
Mm,
Obviously, context is king. And when we look at a runner, we're always applying an individualized approach, looking at their past history, what
mm,
they might be battling with now,
mm.
injury, the lifting history, all of that. But if we just break it down and we say, okay, let's talk in generic terms here, okay? We would obviously apply an
Yeah.
individualized approach to everyone who walks in the door at the running room. But if we just think practically now, let's go really general. Like, what should a runner be doing? Like, what movement should they be focusing on? What muscle group should they focusing on? Like, if we could pick, I don't know, let's say 6 exercises, the running room fundamentals, what would they be? And how would people implement them, at home?
So yeah, again, like it really depends on like what level they're at, what kind of experience they've had, and all of those things that you just mentioned, Belly. But if I was to pick like just kind of a stock standard list of like the things that we want to focus on and more like kind of a
Yep.
general list would be we want to be doing some kind of like calf plyometric exercise. So some kind of like bouncing, kind of
Yep.
skipping exercise. We call them like pogos. That's
Mm-hmm.
going to start to develop that kind of like plyometric capacity that's more close to running. Then we
Yep.
want to be doing like a really heavy calf exercise, whether that's just like holding a big weight and doing a few reps off of like a step, something
Yep.
something in that kind of vein with your legs straight. And then I probably would want to do that with your leg bent. So like we can already see the first 3 exercises are just calf. Like we just want to get your
Yep.
calf unbelievably strong. Calf is king for runners.
And Bowie, just jumping in
Once
there,
we've
I
got
think
that kind of like yeah.
just jumping in there with one thing, I think it's a really important point. Those 3 exercises that you spoke of, like if we speak to runners, often they say my glutes don't fire, or they've been told that their glutes aren't firing, or something like that. But we know that the calf is the powerhouse that contributes to propulsion or driving you forward with running. So Beau has just mentioned 3 exercises there. Before he's mentioned anything about the glutes that are really powerful in generating propulsive force. So some pogos, bent leg calf raises, straight leg calf raises. Move on, Bowie. What's your next couple of exercises?
The next 2 things that I would want to be including is some kind of like knee dominant squat variation. If that's like a barbell lat squat, a front
Yep.
squat, a split squat, even just some lunges, doesn't really matter. We want to be loading up your quads and your hips to some extent because your quads are going to be like a really big, like kind of key component in your running. The calves will push you
Yep.
forwards. The quads will stop you from like falling over essentially. Then with any kind of hills, they're going to take on a lot of work. So we want the quads working really hard. And then we also do want to start to attack the glutes more so if we break the glutes up into like the extension component. So like your glute max, we want that to be
Yep.
quite strong. And the way that we'd attack that is some kind of hinge pattern. Now hinging basically means just bending down to pick something up.
Yep.
So we could be doing deadlifts, we could be doing
Yep.
kettlebell swings, Romanian deadlifts, whatever it is. We tailor that to where they're at and also like what they're interested in.
Sure.
That would probably be my next 2 big rocks. And then the third one that I think is very important is essentially like lateral hip stability or strength.
Yep.
So whether we're doing more of a balance oriented exercise on one leg, like a single leg squat, kind of like reaching out and touching different points on the ground while standing on one leg, or doing something
Yep.
like a clamshell or a side plank. Reason
Yep.
being, when you land on one leg, your hip on the stance leg has to do heaps of work to stop your other hip from just falling and you just falling over. And that's something that is very repetitive and consistent throughout running. And we want to make sure the side of your hip is strong enough to control you and give you that kind of stability, as well as like mitigating the forces as you're running.
Sure, mate. I think that's huge. And I think just summing that up, like what we always say here, at the running room is like those fundamentals are some heavy compounds: squat, hinge, something like that, like you said, to address the knee and then the hip. Some single leg exercises I think are really important, like you just said, because you are, when you run, on one leg or none. Throw in some calf, some really good quality calf work and some plyometrics, and you've got a pretty well-rounded program. I think what we then do is, we would really go down that individualized, pathway with someone. And it might be that, hey, you need some more mobility at your ankle. It might be, hey, we've got to work on some lumbo-pelvic control and some core stability, that kind of stuff. But I think if everyone, if we go really generally sticking to those principles, heavy compound, some single leg exercises, definitely some calf work in there, and something to make you a little bit more, springy or stiff, to get off the ground quickly, you're on your way to really improving your performance and also reducing your injury risk. So I think today, Beau, we just wanted to see that, there absolutely is huge benefit in S&C and strength and conditioning for runners. It doesn't have to be complicated. We don't have to overcomplicate it. And the gains that you get, not only from performance, but injury risk, are incredible. So we would encourage everyone to get out there, start implementing some strength training. One thing we probably haven't covered, and again, I think context is king, is where would this fit in someone's week? And it's obviously very individualized. But Beau, do you have any thoughts on that?
I definitely think it's very individualized because there's certain populations where I won't let them do them on alternate days. Like, you can't do strength training and then gym and then strength training and then gym. I would say for the most part, you can do you're running in the morning and then space it out and do your strength training later in the day, or you can just do it on the alternate day. You really need to be doing kind of 2 to 3 sessions of proper strength training. So if you're running 5 to 6 times a week, you're going to have to do them on the same day. That strength training you probably shouldn't do the day before a big or a faster run, because it'll fatigue you and it might reduce your performance slightly. So I'd always be doing it kind of after a hard run, either that afternoon or the day after. And if you're not going to do it 2 to 3 times, you're really not going to see the same kind of benefits. So being religious, being consistent, getting someone to hold you accountable, like a physio, a coach, a mate, is incredibly important for all of this to be effective in terms of getting those gains in performance, but preventing injury as well.
Absolutely. And I think, what we'd love to see is that if people started thinking of, you might have your A race and starting to think of a bit of a runner's preseason, or thinking about your, when your A race might be, work backwards from there. And if you could have a really intensive strength block, well before that, to get these gains, we actually see that as you get closer to your A race, sure, you might then start diminishing some of the, the frequency of the strength training. We can see that we can maintain those gains as we get closer to the race. So those 3 sessions might become 2 or 1 as you get really close to your event. But, we would love to start seeing runners think about their runnings as a season. Cool, I've now got, 6 months to my race. I'm going to put in a really good 12-week block of S&C to build all of this performance, build all this resilience in my tissues, which can then often mean that you can hold higher training loads with your running and stay injury-free and really perform better. So I think that's how we kind of approach things.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, having a kind of a structured plan around your races is really, really important, because there's different things that we'd be doing when we're chasing kind of certain adaptations in terms of stiffness in the muscles, in terms of tendon strength, and then just in terms of general strength and capacity. So we'd want to make sure that we're chasing all those goals in an appropriate way. And then when you are just trying to maintain or even kind of peak towards a race, you might be using some slightly different types of exercises that are either a little bit heavier and less reps, or more just high effort, almost like isometrics or something along those lines, which is basically just pushing as hard as you can against a fixed object. Those types of things that we might include closer to a race would probably actually make you just run faster in the day with very little impact in terms of fatigue.
For sure.
And that's actually something we use in high performance sport. Sorry to cut you off there, Billy. I was just going to say, if I was dealing with someone going off to play in the AFL or the NRL grand final, or they had a big game on the weekend, we would go into the gym for the last week and we would just do very low reps, very high intensity. We'd be doing some isometric pushes, a little bit of jumps, and that stuff would massively improve their performance on the weekend. Do the same thing for runners.
Huge. Beau, mate, thank you for your time. I think that was an awesome chat. I hope people get something out of that. And if you aren't doing strength training, you're running, hopefully this convinces you that you should start. You can find Beau and the rest of the team at the running room over at Clovelly, but also Bowie is across at iMove Physio at Panania as well. So you can find him there. If you need any help, if you're thinking, hey, where do I start? How do I start? we can absolutely help you with programming, with individualization, which we think is key. Absolutely, it is key. But Beau, I want to thank you for your time, and yeah, mate, I will see you shortly.
Yeah, easy as. Catch you later, mate. Have a good one. Thanks for having me on.